Usually what happens with chocolate is it's actually a craving in the prodrome phase. And so a lot of people will get food cravings. That's part of phase 1 of migraine. And if you are a person who gets food cravings and that food craving is chocolate, you should usually take your migraine acute medication and eat the chocolate if you want. And
Okay.
then you will have eaten the chocolate and treated the migraine at the same time. Hello and welcome back to The Wellbeing. My name is Madison.
My name is Rachel.
And last week we talked about migraine, which is my personal favorite thing to talk about on this planet. And we're going to talk about it again this week and maybe again after that next week, depending on how long this conversation is, because you don't want to listen to us talk for like 5,000 hours.
I feel like it's a lot to take in, so like short spurts of
Yeah.
it is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And we
And
got
it's
cut
so
off
common.
early last week, but I think it was honestly like the perfect amount of time to digest and then like come
Mm-hmm.
back. It's like reading a
Yeah.
self-help book. Like you can't read a
Yeah.
whole self-help book in 2 days because you won't digest any of it.
I agree.
Yeah.
My friend the other day was telling me that she was going to read, like, she had like a list of like 6 or 7 self-help books she was reading. And I was like, okay, but like, are you going to read those all in a row?
Was that her plan?
Yes, that was her plan.
Wait, I'm
And I
curious
was
which
like,
books they are.
girl, you can't. There was one that was like about emotionally immature parents.
Oh.
I can't remember the other ones, but I
She's like,
remember that one.
we're doing some therapy here.
She has a therapist, but yes, she's like, I'm reading these books all as well.
Dang, that's
Mm-hmm.
impressive. I do love a good self-help book, truly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I
I agree.
used to read them in like 2 days and just
Wow.
wanted all of the
Whoa.
information to like absorb into my brain
Mm-hmm.
because I'm a really efficient
Mm-hmm.
person. Like I love to
Mm-hmm.
just like be doing things all the time. And then I realized that I couldn't remember anything about like how
Oh,
like when reading it, I was like, wow, that is so profound. I'm gonna start doing that. And then you forget all of it. So
yeah.
then I started just reading like a chapter, and then that week I would implement that chapter.
Oh, interesting.
That's much more helpful.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
I'm gonna tell her that.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Tell her
She's open
that
to
it doesn't
hearing that.
work to just absorb into your brain. But maybe it does for some people. It just doesn't for me.
I don't think so. You have to
um,
have time to implement and try stuff.
yeah. Yeah. Hence why we're breaking up this migraine
Yes,
podcast.
exactly. Anyway,
Cool. Okay, so last week I know Matt and I just reviewed on this a little bit. If you don't know and you didn't tune in to last week, definitely go back and listen to that one. We talk all about vestibular migraine, how to recognize if you're having symptoms of it, the different phases of it. Obviously, I am the interviewer, and Maddie is the interviewee for this one. This is her bread and butter and her life sauce.
it really is my life, my whole entire life.
Yeah.
Not in a funny way. In a funny way, but not in a funny way.
Yeah. I actually
Lives
think
in
it's
my
so
brain.
cool that you picked this and like that you do this specialty even without being somebody that suffers from vestibular migraine.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was an accident. Definitely wasn't on purpose, but I love it now. Don't mistake it for not liking it. It
No.
was an accident. It just happens. I think it's like how some people become oncologists but they never had cancer, you know? That used to
Yeah.
really bother me. Like people will be like, well, you don't have a vestibular disorder, you don't get it. And then I had to really think outside of that. Like not every neurologist has a neurology condition. Not every PT. Like I've never before PT school, I'd never been to a PT.
Yeah. I mean,
Like
honestly, sometimes that's an advantage because when you're in it too much, it can bias your opinion. And not everybody,
yeah,
obviously, but it can like have
totally.
an effect on how you think about things or it can
Hmm.
bias it. Like I think there's advantages of both ways.
Totally.
For
And like to
instance,
consult with people who do have it, obviously.
yeah, and like you know everything about it. And like
Not
also like
everything.
I work with babies and I don't have a
Yeah,
baby. Like I know everything there is to know about gross motor skills, fine motor skills, feeding like in a baby 0 to 18 months, like
totally.
everything. I don't have a baby.
There you go.
I
Well, I
get
don't
all
have
these like
migraine, but I know everything, almost everything there is to know about migraine disease as a whole.
yes.
So let's
So
talk
that
about
is
it.
what we're gonna cover.
More migraine.
So I
Happy yes.
know, yes, I have been doing so well at not saying
I'm so
migraines.
proud of you.
Yeah, I'm pretty proud of myself. I have to, it's a check though, like it's not like
It's
natural.
hard. Yeah,
It's not a flow state for
it will
sure.
be.
Okay, so last week I know we mentioned that we wanted to go over something that's common. This week are certain food triggers for migraine.
Mm-hmm.
I know, I typed out migraines.
That's okay.
Okay,
It's a
fixed it.
learning. It's all learning. It's all learning as long as the intention is there.
It's
Food
there.
triggers. This is one of the hottest topics. The research shows that doing an elimination diet is not actually the best way to go about treating migraine, and that getting rid of all those foods it says to get rid of on the internet is not evidence based at all. Now, does that mean that nobody has food triggers? No. Just means that if you do have food triggers, your food triggers are not going to be the same as other people's food triggers. So most people will come to me and say, well, I'm going to start this thing called HYH, or the Heal Your Headache Diet, which is a term coined by a man named Dr. Buchholz, Bucholz, from a book that he wrote a while ago. It's a pretty old book at this point and has basically lists at the end of like things you should eat and things you should not eat. And it's based on the theory of tyramine, some histamine, and some other things. And again, this goes back to like, is there evidence for this or not? There is some evidence for histamine and migraine. And there's more and more coming out all the time. There is practically no evidence for migraine and tyramine. Um, d- is that to say that no one is sensitive to it? Again, no. Nothing in migraine is all or nothing. And so I don't like to say like no one should ever do this or everyone should do this, because some people really do benefit from this diet, but I find that overwhelmingly a different thing works better. And so before you go taking all these things out of your diet, which then you ultimately need to reintroduce to your diet, which is the part no one does. And then 10 years later, you're still stuck on this diet. And now then you try to reintroduce stuff, and then you need to work with a dietitian because your gut microbiome is a disaster, to be
Oh,
completely frank about it.
yeah.
So if you were going to go on this diet, if you're like, HYH is for me, I don't have a history of food anxiety, I don't have a history of any disordered eating or eating disorder, and I don't have a history of like, even if you don't fit into like the disordered eating category, just like weird stuff around food. This is not the same as allergies. I also want to be clear about that. If you're allergic to something, that's not what I'm talking about here. So if you're not in that category of like, I think I will potentially build up a fear, and be honest with yourself about foods while doing this. Like I know some people who the HYH diet has given ARFID to, which is like a really severe restrictive feeding disorder. I know some people who have literally been unable to reintroduce stuff without the work of a significant intervention with dietitians because of this diet. So I want to give all these caveats before we talk about it, because on the internet, it looks like the best thing ever and it's going to cure my migraine disorder. It's not. If you do this, basically you take out a bunch of vegetables and uh, unless it's super fresh meats and leftovers and pretty much anything that's cooked outside of your home, most snack foods, like most packaged and convenience foods, which I mean we should probably get rid of anyway. Um, a lot of different types of cheeses. The list goes on and on and on. And basically you take that out for 90 days or less. And then you see when you reintroduce them if you are sensitive to that thing. So one of the things that people have to take out are onions and avocados, for example. People tend to like to introduce those ones again first because they're in everything. Onions are in everything, and
Hmm.
avocados, people just really like them. So they like
Yeah.
to try and do those ones first. And when you try to reintroduce these foods, you have to do it for a couple times in a row and wait up to a couple of days to see if you have a reaction. But the problem
Mm.
is that if then the weather changes and your period is coming and you eat an onion, it's probably not the onion, it's probably the other thing. So there are so
Hmm.
many variables and so many factors that can make this difficult that, again, this is really effective and super helpful for some people. But for other people, it just makes it seem like every single food is a food trigger, and then you do not end up eating any foods. I will say if you truly have food triggers, it's likely to be alcohol and caffeine
Mhm.
and maybe one or two other things, like maybe. But even still, those like maybes that I would say are shouldn't be more than like three or four.
Could
So,
it be like could it be any alcohol or any caffeine,
mhm.
or could it be like
That's a
certain
good
types of
question.
alcohol, certain
Yeah.
types of like caffeine in coffee versus tea?
Yeah. Yes. It can be the amount of caffeine. It
Okay.
could be the amount of alcohol. Like if you have one small sip of a vodka soda, it's probably going to be different than if you have a whole glass of wine.
Right.
And most people with migraine are pretty sensitive to alcohol in general, especially if you have vestibular migraine because it offsets the fluid in your vestibular system, which is why when you drink too much in college, the room spun around. It's for the same reason. So yeah, if you have a sip of coffee, for some people, like I know that if their husband is pouring coffee and it like splashes, and it splashes into your water and you drink that water, some people are so sensitive to it that that amount, like a small amount splashed into my water and I didn't even know about it till later, like that will trigger something
That's
for people.
so crazy.
Whereas other people have no problem. Like I know someone who was like really avoiding going to the dentist recently.
Mhm.
She had to get a root canal. And she finally did it. And she's like, I survived. And then I went and got myself an iced coffee. And I know because I'm an iced coffee drinker that they don't usually make that decaf. So, like,
Yeah.
it's really person dependent. It
Okay.
really, really is. And
Yeah.
it's also like if you're going to drink caffeine, then if you're going to drink caffeine, it should be, or you want to drink coffee, I should say, and you want it to be decaf, it should be Swiss water processed decaf, not regular decaf, because regular decaf is decaffeinated with chemicals. So you
Mhm.
have the chemicals, and it's also not totally decaf. Whereas if you do it with Swiss water processed, then it's actually decaffeinated, like 99.99% decaf, and there's no chemicals.
Okay. I think
So
we talked
there's
about that
a lot of things to consider. I think we
in
talked
our
about that in the
coffee.
caffeine
Yeah.
episode. Yeah, the
Yeah.
coffee
I was
episode.
like, this feels familiar. Okay, well that's good to know. Are there
Yeah.
any super common triggers? Like I know caffeine and alcohol are two that are really common, right?
Mm-hmm.
For
Those are
people,
probably the only like I don't want to call them across the board ones because people
not
like
everybody.
this woman with the at the dentist, right? Like she's like, I went and got myself a cup of coffee. So it's not across the board. But those are definitely the most common ones. The most common one that people think is their trigger is chocolate. Now, I'm not
Oh,
saying
okay.
that this is not a trigger. Again, I'm not here to tell anyone that the life they are living is wrong. That's not what I'm saying. But usually, what happens with chocolate is it's actually a craving in the prodrome phase. And so, a lot of people will get food cravings. That's part of phase one of migraine. And if you are a person who gets food cravings and that food craving is chocolate, you should usually take your migraine acute medication and eat the chocolate if you want. And
Okay.
then you will have eaten the chocolate and treated the migraine at the same time and solved
Interesting.
the problem.
Huh. That is super interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense. So it makes sense to start over basically with a clean slate and then reintroduce things like one at a time to really rule
If
out what
if you're gonna do that
if you're going to
way.
do that. But that's
Which
like
again, there's not evidence for it.
that's a
It's
process.
not the best option. You absolutely, under no circumstances, can do this for more than 90 days. And I want to be also the first person to tell you that I used to make every single one of my patients go on this diet. And I have learned that it's not the best option. And now we don't do that. We do something else.
Okay.
And instead, the better option is to figure out how to balance your blood sugar.
Hmm.
It works 150 million times better, honestly.
Okay.
So, for some people, let's say yogurt is a trigger, and that is like every single time you eat it, it is a problem. Okay, that's very different. And like, don't eat that anymore. Fine. Take yogurt out of the diet if that's a problem for you.
Yeah.
But if you wake up in the morning, you have electrolytes, 30 grams of protein, and a little bit of fiber. So, yogurt and berries. eggs, a protein shake, and an apple, whatever. If you do that and you set yourself up for success for the day, and then every 3 to 4 hours after that, have approximately 30 grams of protein again in a meal, and then at least 10 grams for snacks, that's going to get you to around like 100, 110 grams of protein a day, which for most people is a lot more than they're eating currently, and is
Hmm.
also going to help balance their blood sugar. Do not forget the fiber. I think when people say like eat more protein, they think like you just have to eat protein. No, you also need to be eating your fiber, friends. Eat your herbs, eat your vegetables, eat the fruits. Um, but if you are thinking about this and you're like, yeah, like I'll have like crackers for a snack, and then like later I'll just have an apple like an hour later, you're usually a lot of the times we're spiking our blood sugar and then having it crash, and it's that change in blood sugar which becomes more sensitive also the closer we get to our period, which is why not why but a another piece of why migraine attacks are more common near our period. um as we have these like big highs and lows, those are triggers for attacks because they are really inflammatory cascades for our body. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
That makes, yeah. Oh, yeah. That makes total sense. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So if you're somebody that gets a migraine attack like every once in a while, like maybe like once every 6 months or something, and you can like
Mm-hmm.
feel it coming on,
Mm-hmm.
do you have any tips of how to manage
Mm-hmm.
symptoms for someone
Yes.
that is in that
Yes,
experience?
of course. So migraine, like we talked about before, is a disorder or a disease that is based on a spectrum. So that is another one of those spectrums is frequency. So some people have a new attack every day. Some people have one once a year or twice a year. And for the person who has episodic migraine, you want to treat that migraine because untreated migraine begets more migraine attacks. So the more attacks you have, the more attacks you will continue to have. So most people in my practice and also in my group will say like, "Yeah, this bothered me like I don't know, once or twice a year for my whole life and then randomly it got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and now I have it every single day." So we want to know what's happening. Most people who have migraine know they have migraine or at least headaches, but they don't go get it treated because they say, well, this happens once a year. I take a sick day from work, and then it's not a big deal, and I go back to living my life. However, those tend to start to add up. Plus, as we age, we tend to get more sedentary, we get more inflamed, we have fewer healthy habits, we get more stressed out, more stuff
Yeah.
comes, right? We start to have kids and
Hormones.
bigger jobs, and our hormones fluctuate more, and
Makes sense.
pregnancy happens, and postpartum, like all of these things happen, and that inflames our body and also like causes change in our body that we weren't used to before, and migraine gets more and more common. So, to prevent the chronicification of migraine, you have to treat the acute attacks because a person whose brain has migraine is going it just has a hypersensitive brain in general. I know you were talking to me about this before of like, yeah, sometimes when I stare at the computer too long and I haven't had breakfast and I only had coffee, like I start to get pretty light sensitive, which I think is a common experience, but also for people with a family history of migraine is something to be aware of. So, the first things you can consider are the non-drug interventions. Then we can also talk about drug interventions. So you always want to have what I call a toolkit on hand. There is not one thing that treats migraine or treats dizziness or treats vertigo or what have you. A lot of people are out here in the world being like, if you just stimulate your vagus nerve, if you just stop having not enough magnesium, if you just do X, then you'll be cured. There's no cure for migraine. And I don't mean that in a sad, depressing way. I mean that in a like, okay, now that we know there's not a cure, what the heck do we do to manage it way? There are things that you can do every day. But in this specific question you asked me about, I know I'm being very long winded about this, but in the very specific question about what do I do if this is happening once a year to me, the first
Hmm.
things that I would do would be consider some supplements and then electrolytes. So the first electrolyte would be any electrolyte you like, whether it's Pro Mix, Element. I don't really love Liquid IV with all the sugar, but the sugar-free one. Putting extra good sea salt in your water with some potassium, which cream of tartar is a great like household
Hmm,
staple that has a ton of potassium in it.
interesting.
And maybe some lemon and maple syrup, like making one at home. You can do that first if you feel like coming on. The second thing is I would have a high protein snack. So beef jerky, yogurt, uh, cottage cheese, chicken, like whatever, sandwich. Have a high protein like filling snack, and then take magnesium and ginger usually. And obviously run this by your doctor, please. Do not just do this because you heard this on a podcast. But those four things tend to be super, super, super helpful. I'm not saying
Interesting.
that it will fully stop the attack in its tracks, but if you're
Hmm.
like, I literally cannot move out of a dark room, it sometimes makes the day a little bit more tolerable. Sometimes it
Yeah.
fully stops in its tracks. You can also, if this really is once a month, not once a month, once a year, twice a year, you can also try Advil or Tylenol, something like that. Can be helpful if that's something that you find works for you. You never want to take specific medications more than 9 times every 30 days because that can lead to rebound attacks. So if you're a person with migraine and let's say you have knee pain, um, and you're taking Advil every single day or Advil plus Tylenol more than 9 times per month, that is going to ultimately build more pain receptors in your brain and cause more attacks.
Mm,
Makes sense.
yep. Yeah. Okay. That's super interesting. Just a little context for you guys. Like so we did this podcast last week and last week? Oh, we did it earlier in the week because I
Mm-hmm.
texted you. So I texted
Yeah.
Maddie like a few days after doing the podcast and I was like, so low key, I'm working on a new product for my company and so I've been on a screen for like 12 hours a day the last few weeks just like working and which is not typical for me and I hate that for my eyes. Like I know it's not the good things to do. I was not doing my 20-20-20 rule where I look at the screen, look up in the distance for 20 seconds. I was not doing that. And so I had this morning where this has happened to me before, but basically I like woke up and my eyes were like, I felt like they were like shaking in my head. And after working on my computer for a few hours, and I like realized at that moment I had had like 2 cups of coffee. I hadn't eaten anything for breakfast. I was just like working, working, working. And I've had this happen before, but after doing the podcast with Mad last week, I was like, oh my gosh, I think that this is like beginnings of symptoms for something like vestibular migraine or a migraine attack because I've had a few in the past. So that was super interesting to just like put um, a thought to it instead of just like, wow, I think my eyes are just tired. Yeah. So then I ate some protein
Yeah.
and
Do
I
it.
took a break from my screen and
Uh-huh.
I felt much better and I was totally
Yeah.
fine.
Go
But
for a walk, do
yeah,
some breathing. Other things you
yeah,
can add, like get a little bit of movement in, breath work, meditation, screen free time, podcast, something that like kind of changes your mood or mental state. Any of those things can be super helpful. And there's great research for all of them.
yeah, yeah. Super,
Mm-hmm.
super helpful, but also like just so interesting because I think as somebody that if I didn't know you and
Mm-hmm.
also like we went to PT school and my husband is dabbles in the
Mm-hmm.
migraine world. Um, I would not know anything about that. Like I wouldn't even know like how to seek out help or like how to search for you or like tips, resources, that type of thing. So I just thought that was really cool and really interesting to know and to learn and
Yeah.
have it come into effect like 2 days later.
When it rains,
um,
it pours.
yeah.
Okie doke. All right. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. We covered some stuff about food triggers, balancing your blood sugar. And then we also talked about what to do if you are a person who gets a migraine or like severe headache, which isn't always migraine, but oftentimes is in this episode. And next time, we're going to talk about prevention and also pharmacological options. Remembering that neither Rachel or I are prescribing doctors, but I do know a lot about medication options.
Yay. Thanks for joining and we will see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.